Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Truman Show, everybody. Good to see all of you here on This Week in Mormons. I'm Jeff Openshaw, your founder and co-host. Happy to be with you this week, and I thank you very much for joining us. Whether you are streaming it wherever you get podcasts, hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, shout out to you, our YouTube viewers. Please hit that subscribe button as well so you can not just hear the podcast content, but see our beautiful visages. Seriously, everybody, in case you didn't know, you can actually watch the podcast on YouTube. I don't know if people knew that. But anyway, glad you're all here. Thank you again to our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/thisweekinmormons. You guys help make the show possible, and that is much appreciated, helping us keep the lights on in an ever more expensive world of podcasting and all that jazz. And we hope you'll also follow us on social media. Enough plugging. I'm thrilled this week once more to bring back my dear friend Jared Gillens. What's going on, dude?
Hey. Nothing's going on. I will tell you though, I liked that Truman Show reference. Kelsey and I recently rewatched that. It was like a month.
It's a great movie.
It holds up. I hadn't seen it for over a decade, and we were like, sometimes these older, quote unquote, older movies, just you don't realize that they didn't age well. But I think that one ages really well. Also, incidentally, a couple of nights ago, I don't know why, we both just got the hankering to watch Prince of Thieves, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Okay,
and it holds up as well. There were a couple things.
Doesn't.
Yeah, no, there were a couple things where I was like, that's kind of that kind of raunchy, like not raunchy, but just sort of deviant sexual humor, like because the sheriff of Nottingham, is like a scoundrel and like in the worst way,
yeah.
and they try to make it kind of funny, and you're kind of like, post Me Too, not as funny, but Alan Rickman is always delightful, right? He's wonderful, and and I was kind of thinking. And those of you, bonus if you're watching on YouTube, but I haven't had a haircut in a long time because
you look good.
Here in Eastern Idaho, it's kind of hard to find a barber or a salon that is currently exercising COVID precautions. So I bet I was like looking at Kevin Costner's hair and I was like, I think I could do that. I think I'm not too far from a Kevin Costner Robin Hood haircut.
Now let's talk about your facial hair though. Is this deliberately a mustache? Like Chester A. Arthur situation, or is it?
Oh, you just can't see it very well because my beard is getting very gray.
Yeah.
The mustache is a little longer, I think, than the beard is a little more closely cut. That is on purpose. I'm just kind of trying out different looks, but it's a full beard. It's not a full Chester A. Arthur.
I haven't seen you bearded for a while, so I'm excited you'll be.
I really didn't like wearing a mask over a beard, but I've found keeping it trimmed short like this, it's been okay. So
it's manageable. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fine.
I don't know what it's like to wear a mask without a beard. So
yeah, no, you maintain the beard year round. I generally wear my beard seasonally, but I skipped it last winter because I was like, I don't like this beard mask thing. But I was just like, you know what? It's time to bring the beard back.
I really debated letting it go and seeing if I could do a full COVID beard last spring, but I didn't trim for like a month or so, and it's just scraggly and getting wiry, and you got to commit at that point to make it happen. I couldn't do it.
Once you get like that length, you have to start investing in some product, like some beard.
I had some
balm.
oil. Yeah.
I use beard oil. Even at this short, I'll use beard oil because I just like it helps keep it soft and also kind of conditions the skin underneath it. It helps so you don't get all that beard dandruff on your shirt.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it gets longer, you got to get something like a balm sort of thing to kind of moisturize it and keep it manageable. Because like I said, otherwise you go full like Hemingway.
I bet Brigham Young and John Taylor had these conversations.
Oh yeah, they probably used like seal blubber imported from Canada as their beard oil. I don't know.
The other day I did a beard trim. We went to the pool for the last day of the season, and as I trimmed my beard and shorter, all of a sudden it revealed just like white skin. Basically, I'd put sunblock on, and then it just kind of found its way around my beard as I'd massage it into my face. And so it was basically underneath my beard by that point. So as I trimmed my beard, following my entire beard shape, I had just like this like white layer underneath. It was bizarre. It was like weird to like reveal sunscreen as you're trimming your facial hair. It was kind of strange.
Yeah.
So I bet you all wanted to hear about this, everybody. That's why you tune in.
This is the hot content that people listen to TWIM for.
That's what I'm talking about, man. This is the dream. I'm stoked though. We're already up on conference. That's coming up here in a week and a half.
Always exciting. And I'm going to make a controversial, I don't know if it's a controversial statement. So I just recently finished, I was kind of going back through conference because I hadn't like re-listened or reread all of it. And so I was like, here's some talks I haven't listened to, whatever. And I'm ready to definitively state, Jeff, that the best talk was Elder Gong's.
I do like that Elder Gong.
His talk about room in the inn. Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that's subjective. To me, that was the best talk. To me, that was the talk that spoke to me.
See, I admire you. I went into 6 months ago. I went into it saying like I'm going to read one of these talks every day. I'm going to be into it. I've tried, but I have not succeeded. I have not succeeded in my effort.
So what helped me is over the last couple of months, I'm recovering from a passive shoulder injury because I'm over 40. So things happen to you without you actually doing anything. So I've had this frozen shoulder thing that I have to go to physical therapy for. And every day I have to stretch twice a day, morning and night, for like at least, it takes me 30 to 40 minutes to do all these stretches. So I listen to stuff while I'm doing my stretching. And I was like, at the beginning of each stretching session, I'm going to listen to one conference talk. So that helps me get through it.
You might as well. I need to get disciplined like that because I'll just find myself, I could be in a similar situation, but I'll just find some other distraction. Like I could put on an episode of Fresh Prince while I'm stretching. I'll find something
Speaking
else.
of fresh content, Fresh Prince, I'm sure that's aged extremely well.
It's yes and no. It was surprisingly in the early seasons a lot more almost like pretty like Black Lives Matter in the first couple seasons. A lot more subject matter than I remember talking about, like not fighting the power per se, but like really getting into a lot of issues affecting African Americans more on the nose. Like in the show, they kind of lampoon it because, the Banks family are wealthy Black Republicans.
Right. There's an irony, and they acknowledge the irony in the show.
It's funny they acknowledge the irony because Uncle Phil, they talk a lot more in early seasons how he was like a big time civil rights activist, how he said he marched in Selma. There's a lot more of that going on in the first couple of seasons, and they just kind of drop it for some reason. I found myself many, many months ago randomly watching the first episode to see how it would be, and then I've just kind of picked it off little by little ever since. It's
interesting to do. What Will Smith has talked about doing a reboot, like starting it, like doing a
they're
new.
Doing a dramatic reboot.
They're taking out, I think, 90% of the comedy and making it a serious dramatic show about a kid from Philly who has to leave because of gang violence, and I don't know. I don't think that sounds amazing because I like the laughs from Fresh Prince, but I'd be willing to give that a shot. I like Will Smith. Generally, he acts in some pretty decent films.
I think the funny thing to watch on that show is in the later seasons how you see Will Smith now, who's like at the cusp of becoming the biggest movie star in the world. And so it's just funny watching him come into his own and then realize like he's at the point where he is like way beyond this show, but he's still doing it to finish it out. I mean, he made the final season between Bad Boys and Independence Day, for example.
Oh, interesting. He was huge then. Yeah.
They aired the finale and Independence Day came out like 6 weeks later. Right. And that's what kind of cemented him. So it's kind of funny watching the later seasons because he doesn't seem like Will Smith, like the Fresh Prince. He seems like Will Smith, movie star, who just so happens to still be contractually obligated to do a show.
Right.
He does.
I will just note my favorite running gag on that show is Uncle Phil physically throwing Jazz out the front door. It makes me laugh every time, like laugh out loud. I fall for it every
which
single time.
Which is another little quirk that kind of goes out the window in later seasons. Little things, and Will would break the fourth wall a lot more in early seasons. Like,
that's right, he would. Yeah,
there's things that they don't carry over as much. It's kind of interesting. But
Jazz seemed to
is anyone in a world of recap podcasts, recapping popular sitcoms? I don't think anybody's doing Fresh Prince, at least not yet. I know Parks and Rec is doing one now with Rob Lowe.
Oh, really?
Actually, which I haven't heard it yet. I just love that they got the guy who shows up at the end of season 2 and then leaves halfway through season 6. Recap the whole show that you were on only like 60% of, Rob Lowe.
Well, that's right like how with the West Wing, it's Josh Molina.
It's like you had Joshua Molina, right? I know.
Who is like a wonderful, great character in the show, an essential, I would argue, character in the show. But he also was he came in a little late and then was backburnered after about a season and a half. So. Well, anyway, he does a good, fine job on the West Wing podcast.
Oh, I love the West Wing.
And then,
I think the West Wing Weekly was the first like show recap podcast.
I think so. Think of. And then my favorite, though, probably, and it was interesting because it was recapping as it went, was the Good Place podcast.
That was interesting. That was like The Americans also had a podcast as it was on.
Oh, really?
Which was really good. Very interesting to hear how they filmed it. Other ones that are out right now. Let's see. I know there's one about Scrubs called Fake Doctors Best Friends, which I tried to listen to with Zach Braff and Donald Faison.
I think you told me about this, and that it turns out they don't even really talk about the show. They're just a couple of guys shooting the bull.
It was almost unlistenable.
Yeah.
Ironically, he says in the middle of shooting the bull on his own podcast, there's the Office ladies, and the weird one I got into though was Zach to the Future, the Saved by the Bell recap podcast featuring the guy who created Zach Morris's Trash on Funny or Die, and Mark Paul Gosselaar. Who is Zach Morris? They are the hosts of a podcast recapping Saved by the Bell.
That's really funny.
Which is pretty funny because apparently Mark Paul Gosselaar has never watched the show since he made it, and so
I wouldn't either.
He's like, I don't remember even filming this. I have no idea what happens, and he hates his character, and it's kind of funny. Anyway,
he is a despicable character.
He's kind of seems like he's not happy with. Well, his show got canceled recently. Mixed-ish. It's off the air now, so maybe.
I never saw it.
Anyway, folks, Latter-day Saint news is coming at us. I don't even know where to start this week. There's so much.
I mean, if we're talking about popular culture, should we just jump right in with the hot topic of the week?
Is that LuLaRoe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
LuLaRoe, as you guys may be familiar with, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the clothing line that was a direct sales opportunity that many people I know at least off the top of my head, 2 or 3 people who bought into LuLaRoe and were sales reps, or what do you call it? Consultants. Is that what you call it?
And for context, this documentary explained a lot to me why I feel like I haven't seen that for the past couple of years, because I couldn't avoid it 4-ish years ago, 3 to 4 years ago. I saw people all over the place who were selling it. Now I see much less.
Right. And so, as you also probably know, if have your ear to the ground with the current zeitgeist at all, a documentary dropped a week or so ago on Amazon Prime, called LuLaRoe, and it was all about the debacle that was the rise and then fall and sort of maybe semi-stabilization of the company LuLaRoe. And it's interesting because, why is that relevant to this show? Well, if you haven't seen the documentary, if you have seen it, it would be very clear. But if you haven't, the founders of LuLaRoe are LDS.
Yes, they are.
And it's interesting that, that this is the week that Jeff happened to ask me to host, because he didn't know this when he asked me to be on this week. But the main subject, Deanne Stidham, she's my mom's first cousin. Yes. Yeah, she's the founder and CEO, or who knows? When they asked her in her deposition if she was CEO, she said, "I don't know." But we're going to call her the CEO. She was the founder of LuLaRoe. She's my mom's first cousin. So I don't know her in person, because my mom literally has like 100 cousins. Well, maybe not literally 100, but it's in the high dozens of cousins. And I mean, even if you just look at Deanne's family, she and her twin sister are like the last of, like, I want to say about 10 kids. Like, there's a ton of startups. Startups is her maiden name.
That's her name.
And
then she has like 17 kids in real life.
Yeah, because they've got a yours, mine, and our situation with her husband Mark, and then they also adopted a few kids from Romania, and then they also had some like abandoned kids that they took in. Anyway, the point is, it's a huge family. I don't know Deanne in person. If I walked up to her and said, "I'm Marlene Gillen's son," she would know exactly who I was. Yeah. But anyway, so I don't have a lot of personal interaction with these people, but it was kind of surreal watching, because a lot of the photos that they would show, like of establishing shots and about her family and her family history, I was like, I know these people. My great grandmother was on this documentary about this corrupt MLM company, and I was just like, holy cow. Like, it was really weird to see my family on display on international television.
And I experienced a little bit of that too. Not my family, but as you and I were texting about this, it's so funny how we both have. I'm a little more removed from it, but the main character, like you said, Deanne, made a name startup. As we were talking about this, I remember I think it was when I first started watching the first episode, and they showed Sam Schultz, who features throughout the entire series, and I was like, okay, like I grew up in the same stake as Sam. Like we went to Mutual together. Like I've been to many events with Sam Schultz. His father was my bishop in a YSA ward, and that's when I realized, because Deanne's sister, one of his sisters, is the wife of Harry Schultz, who was my bishop. So that's that part of the family. And so likewise, her brother. You talking about Nancy Schultz? Yeah. Nancy, yes. And then her brother, Frank, was in my home ward growing up, and Frank's daughter's family was also my ward growing up. And I knew they were related to the like the Schultzes in my other part of the stake. But watching this and texting you and stuff and realizing like it's all related, all these people. So it's funny to me, not that I know a ton of them well, but it was funny at least seeing Sam Schultz on there. And I'm like, yeah, I know that guy. And seeing how they were all involved in this wacky organization. And it makes a lot more sense because I saw many people in that family periphery in the LuLaRoe heyday selling it. And I was like, okay, this tracks now that I'm seeing people who are selling it and this is their aunt. I'm seeing a lot of people our age and this was their aunt.
Well, and they showed from the beginning, like when it was first founded, they just populated sort of the C-level of the organization with family members, with a nephew like Sam, and like with their children, like a couple of their sons ended up being in charge of like big parts of the business. And it was really interesting because like one of the things that they emphasized a few times, especially Sam in his interviews, but that like none of them were really qualified to run these department heads in a large organization. And it's one of the things that's surprising about that is that in the documentary they showed, I mean, at one point it was huge. I mean, it was a multi-billion-dollar business.
Yeah. You had Katy Perry, you had them renting Angel Stadium. Right. And putting on a Katy Perry concert.
They also got Mario Lopez at one point. I mean,
do you like how Sam described? I liked how Sam described him as he was more affordable than we expected. Like he was cheaper than we thought it would be to get him.
Hey, it all comes back to Saved by the Bell in this podcast.
Come on, man. I mean,
but I mean, it was a hugely profitable, huge like cash flow type of a business, and for a bunch of people who didn't really know what they were doing and didn't have a lot of qualifications. I mean, you see, then eventually in the documentary, they show how it starts really falling apart. And part of that is because it was an untenable pyramid scheme, right? But still, like, I don't know. I'm impressed that these second cousins of mine, I'm like, how did you even build that before it started falling apart?
It's crazy how huge it got. And yeah, it was a fascinating watch, the whole thing.
It is. Highly recommend it. My oldest sister has now watched the whole thing. She watched it first, and then I watched it with Kelsey, and Jen and I, my sister, were like telling our siblings, like, you have to watch this so we can talk about it. And my mom wasn't aware of it. So I texted her and I was like, Mom, you need to watch this documentary about your cousin Deanne. And she's like, uh-oh. Because this is not new. Like this side of the family, my mom's side, the Brown startup Whiting side of my family, there's a lot of shady and odd.
It's called entrepreneurial spirit.
Okay, but it's beyond that. Like it's beyond that. Like, so it's interesting. There was one part. Did you know Lene, the Deanne's sister Lene?
No. I don't
so
think so.
She's also Southern Californian. She might live in Utah now. But anyway, there was a part in the documentary where they talk about how Lene helped shuttle women. Like at one, like sometimes Deanne
I remember. Yeah.
So sometimes apparently Deanne would like approach somebody who was like really high up, who had a lot of not just sales, but had a lot of people underneath
had
them.
A huge downline. Yeah.
Yeah. The huge downline in the organization, in the pyramid of the organization. Anyway, Deanne would approach women and say, you really could lose some weight. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Who knows how she said it, because she denied it in her interviews. But they basically suggest that those people should lose some weight, and that she knew a great doctor in Tijuana that could do like a bypass or gastric sleeve or whatever they call it to help them with weight loss. And it's such a weird, shady thing so then my mom's cousin Lene is shuttling women, and they said at least 6 or 7 of them down to Tijuana to get this weight loss surgery and then back. And I'm like, why Tijuana? And it just made me think of another one of my mom's uncles, John Ronald Brown, was an infamous doctor. And after he lost his license, he started doing his illegal surgeries also in Tijuana. Now, of course, by this point, he is dead. Like he got arrested for the last time in 1998. He died in prison in 2010, I want to say. But still, so there's no like direct connection between criminal surgeon uncle on that side of the family and what Deanne and Lene are doing. But still, I'm just like, this all feels too familiar, and it feels like history is repeating itself in my mom's side of the family. Anyway, all of this is to say, it was weird, right? And it's like so much of the stuff that they, sometimes they denied things, but other times they admitted it. But when they'd admit it, they just kind of acted like, there's nothing wrong with this.
Why is this a problem?
Why are you even asking? Like, why is this a topic of interest? And it's just like, it was astounding. It was astounding to watch them and how they reacted to things.
And one section of it that was really interesting, Jana Riess sort of speaks to this, speaking about kind of the the gender roles at play, and you could kind of see it. I know Jana publishes what she publishes, and some people don't like it, but you could see this in the documentary, primarily like pushing forth this image, essentially almost of like the submissive wife. And there's weird things at play. I mean, you could tell a lot of the times that Deanne is very deferential to her husband, like stressing, like, you need to praise them and make them feel needed. There were some lewder ways that counsel was given to some of the consultants, and it basically more or less keep your husband happy physically, and he will let you buy whatever you want in order to have your business. But it goes beyond that, where like there's these pressure campaigns to get the men involved in their wife's business, and I think it's dumb. I think it's multi-sided. Part of that is literally they want men to quit their jobs, so like the entire family is dependent on LuLaRoe to succeed. But also it seems like they would try to get the men involved and then start deferring to the men. It's almost like use the women to open the door and get it going, but then lean on the men for some reason to get things done.
Which is so weird, because like, and they pointed to this like partly because, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about the family history of like, there's actual a text and a curriculum associated with that from Deanne's mother. And anyway, but also, I mean, they kind of indicated that this was sort of related to their religion and religious tradition. And so again, these people are LDS.
Oh, and they'd quote the Book of Mormon at company events,
right? And like stuff like, and their company mission statement was like to.
Oh, they quoted McKay. It's in the company mission statement. There's nothing that'll compensate for the failure in the home. That classic line. That's in their mission statement.
Yeah. So there was all sorts of things that were very LDS, but like. I mean, and it was almost as if they were kind of just, without saying it, suggesting that this whole like deferring to the man and like getting the man in and like making him like the person that they would talk to instead of the wife, like that was somehow related. And I'm just like, this is not LDS belief. I mean, no. You could argue that in for many years it's LDS practice, but in the current day and age, the idea that they would need to rope the husband in so that they could use him as their contact instead of the wife, like, where does that come from? That is not an LDS Mormon thing. At least it shouldn't be past, 1985.
No, but I did have just last week, the sister missionaries texted my wife and to ask if something. And my wife's like, well, what do you want to say? And I said, you should respond that they should be going through me for all family related communication. She didn't respond with that though. I was kind of disappointed. Come on, Danielle. Stop being so woke.
Dang it. When your wife's so woke. So let's go back a little bit and talk a little bit because Jana pulls this out and they talked about it a fair bit in the documentary. So Deanne's mother, my great aunt Maureen Startup, she published a book in 1969 called The Secret Power of Femininity: The Art of Attracting, Winning, and Keeping the Right Man for You.
Yes.
And so if many of our listeners may be familiar with the book that preceded this called Fascinating Womanhood, which was, I think Jana says it was published in 65. I think it was 63, though. I don't know. I'm not sure which one of us is right. Anyway, so Helen Andelin writes Fascinating Womanhood. And so the whole premise of this book is making men feel important. And it's like, doing these little things that are just like terribly demeaning to yourself in order to make a man feel good about himself. And so part of that, the idea, the message of the book was, this is what men need and what they deserve. But also part of the message of the book is, and this is also how you can get your way, that when you need something or want something, you can use your fascinating womanhood or your secret power of femininity to convince the man that he should let you purchase this thing or let you do this thing or whatever.
You know what's funny? Can I interject for just a second?
Of course, yeah.
And I mentioned this before, but it seems, I know you'll say more about this, but I think I recall at some point leading into marriage or something like that. And I know we're not speaking specifically about sex or solely about sex, but the church stresses like you are not to use sex as either like a reward or a way to like coerce your spouse. And that goes for both genders, by the way. But that's like that. I don't know where that's written down, but I remember learning this either in a temple recommend class or it might have just been as much as talking to a bishop prior to a wedding or something like that. But that is something we're kind of taught in this day and age. So it's funny to look back before this and it's more use your feminine wiles to get your way. Because that's
and it's not even about like sex necessarily.
Yes, I know.
So like I remember my mom.
That's all I think about.
So this is a funny quirk about my family beyond what I've already talked about. But my dad actually dated my mom's older sister before he dated my mom. So
Strong,
that was always a
very
topic of interesting conversation when that would come up.
Was that something they could laugh about later on, or was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely later on. But, it caused some tension, especially right around the time when my dad and mom first started dating. And even when they got married, like Laurie might have been, it took her a while to get on board and be okay with the whole history. But I remember my parents telling stories about how Laurie would kind of try and use some of these like fascinating women with tactics, like they were getting ready, setting up for a dance, and this punch bowl is so heavy, Steve, will you lift it because you're so strong, like that kind of stuff. And so it's like, Laurie wasn't using sex per se, but she was trying to use some sort of like weird reverse psychology or whatever you want to call it to convince my dad that she saw him as a strong, powerful man, and that she needed him to, help her get by in this time of her life, and that eventually, that would be able to come back to her, that when she wanted something or whatever, then she could be like, oh, you're so strong, so you could do this for me, kind of thing, whatever. The point I wanted to make, though, and so they talk about this book, and then in Jana talks about how there's a connection, because so Maureen wrote this book in 1969, Helen Andelin wrote this other book in 1965, and the two of them are quite similar. And it's really interesting that Maureen and Helen Andelin are actually first cousins. So Helen Andelin, her maiden name is Barry, and that's another line that I'm very much connected to, the Barrys. She writes this book, and Jana Riess says that she mostly based it off of a series of pamphlets that were published in the 1920s. And kind of not necessarily plagiarized, but gathered the ideas of this and consolidated it into the book. And one of the reasons she publishes this in the mid-60s is because of the sexual revolution, because women are becoming more liberated and like, we don't need men and we can do things on ourselves. And Helen Andelin sees this as a kind of a crisis of femininity, publishes her book to kind of like try to, restore some of this traditional feminine role type stuff. Anyway, so then what's interesting is there's a curriculum associated with Fascinating Womanhood. Like women were encouraged to buy the book, and then almost like a Tupperware party, invite other women into their home and teach principles from the book and kind of spread the gospel, and then encourage them to buy the book and then to organize their own parties in their home and teach women these principles. They were trying to like spread this much like you would do missionary work in the church. So my great aunt Maureen, Helen's cousin, she was totally on board. And I'm getting this now from my mom. This is not from Jana Riess's article. So my mom talked about how Maureen was a very big advocate of this. They mentioned, I think, very briefly that Maureen's startup was a big, I don't know if they talked about this in that, she was a big anti-ERA person. And it was funny because Deanne, at one point in the documentary, talks about how her mom fought for women's rights. And many would argue that Maureen fought against women's rights because she was so vehemently against the ERA. Anyway, so Maureen would do these Fascinating Womanhood parties and seminars. My sister Jen remembers being at a family reunion when she was like a young teen and going to the Fascinating Womanhood, Secret Power of Femininity thing with Aunt Maureen so she could learn. So, I mean, it's nuts. This is the 80s by the time Jen's getting this. Anyway, so my point is, Jana says, even though the two books are very similar, she says it's unlikely, or, she doesn't think that Maureen plagiarized from Helen. She's like, it's likely that she just used the same source material, those 1920s pamphlets. I will tell you, as an insider, that is not correct. She did indeed plagiarize her own first cousin's book. And it was funny because my Aunt Laurie, she actually typed up the manuscript for Maureen for The Secret Power of Femininity. And she got paid when she got married. Instead of getting 8 settings of China, Maureen bought her 16 settings of China. That was her payment for typing up the manuscript. And my mom said she remembers after Laurie finished typing it up, and Laurie had read Fascinating Womanhood. As I said, she had used it on my dad. After she had finished typing it up, she comes to my mom and says, Aunt Maureen's book is really similar to Helen's. And they ended up, and then in the Jana Riess article, she does note that they ended up having a falling out and kind of going their separate ways. That falling out was over the issue of plagiarism. So yeah. Anyway, that's just a little note. I guess a big note, side note into the history of this. But I just want to. It's all relevant, Jared, because this is part of LDS culture. Like in the 1960s and 70s, you couldn't get away from fascinating womanhood or its lesser counterpart, the secret power of femininity. Anyway, and it's just a sort of fascinating thing. I could go on. We could have a whole podcast series about the weird quirks of my extended family on my mom's side. But anyway,
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that more than anything else.
Thank you for letting me give you a small glimpse into the fascinating world of my mom's family.
You're welcome.
Anyway,
so you should watch it, folks.
Watch it.
Yeah. And it's if you're worried about content, it's like mostly okay. I think near the end of it, it kind of shocks you with a couple of F-bombs and stuff. But across 4 episodes, it's
I will say, though, that those F-bombs appeared to be very genuine reactions from the people who were being interviewed.
Well earned. Yeah. All right, I'm going to hit you with a handful of different temple news real fast. The church broke ground on the Phnom Penh, Cambodia temple. Very cool that we'll get a temple in Cambodia. Love the design they're incorporating for it. Quite reflective of the area, something the church has been trying to do recently. Temples typically take roughly 3 years from groundbreaking to dedication. So hopefully this bad boy will be up and running sometime in mid to late 2024, and hopefully COVID won't be a thing by then. That's super duper cool. Also,
do check out the pictures, our listeners, because obviously this is not a visual medium unless if you're watching on YouTube. But go to the links and check out, because it is very cool. It's interesting how, like you said, we've been doing this more with temples lately, and the base is your kind of typical series of boxes that form what's going to be inside the temple, but the spires have this very cool Southeast Asian look to them, and I like how the church is trying to acknowledge like local architecture and local traditions and try to.
That is true. I'm looking at it right now. I took my thumb on it. If you were to get rid of the spire and look at just the base, that's kind of interchangeable.
No, most temples are a series of boxes, or like the Seattle Temple, one giant box, but like. But the way you get the personality is kind of the columns on the outside or the shape of the windows, and then always the spires. So I like the spires. It looks kind of like a cool old Cambodian style thing that you would see like in a Tomb Raider movie or something like that.
Speaking of boxy temples, because North American temples, I feel like get the short shrift sometimes when it comes to architecture. They're beautiful buildings, but they're not architecturally adventurous, shall we say? And a big deal right now, we have an open house underway for the Pocatello Idaho Temple. This is particularly a big deal because we haven't had an open house since COVID. So this is the first one since that happened. The next temple that was in line to be dedicated was the Rio De Janeiro Temple. It was supposed to get dedicated like right after COVID started. So that poor thing's just been sitting there. And because Brazil, is having some struggles, to say the least, with COVID, who knows when that'll happen. But up in Idaho, which also has no issues whatsoever with COVID, they're golden. As you said, Eastern Idaho, they've got COVID-free barbers everywhere. Down there in Pocatello, they got the temple. The temple's fine looking. It is kind of that, just kind of, it almost looks like a shrunken Mount Timpanogos when I see this first picture.
It does
in this article. I get that vibe. It's okay size, but it's not as big as some of those humongous Utah temples. But this article is kind of cool because it's about a Latter-day Saint who toured the Pocatello Temple with
a non-Latter-day Saint.
Sorry, did I say Latter-day Saint?
Yeah.
So a not a member of the church who got to experience touring the temple with Elder Stevenson of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. I believe it was East Idaho News reporter Kalama Hines. Is that correct? She is the one who went through. So it's like it's her own story. She enjoyed it. I think it was all positive overall. I think it's great for us to do this kind of outreach and such. And it's a beautiful building. I'm excited for the people of Pocatello. Good for them.
You said Kalama, and you said she. I clicked on the profile picture, and I believe Kalama is a man because he's got a goatee.
See, I thought it was.
But Kalama sounds like a feminine name because we speak Spanish, and anything.
That's Elder Stevenson's. That's Elder Stevenson's wife, Lisa. I'm sorry. So based on the pictures, I thought they were referring to her as.
Yeah, no, Kalama is a man, and he is the reporter. Yeah, who's writing from.
Kalama is a man.
Yes.
Name of this episode. Is he the one wearing what looks like the flag of Hawaii on a mask behind Elder Stevenson in that one picture?
It could be, yes.
Yeah, I think that is he.
Yes.
Anyway, it's always cool, and I'm particularly excited about this because still many, many, many months from now, we will have the open house for the Washington, D.C. temple.
Yep.
It'll come back.
Well, I'm excited for the Pocatello. Pocatello is about a 40-minute drive for me, and my mother-in-law was very enterprising, and she organized us all and found a weekend that worked for everybody, and she got us all tickets to go to the open house with my brother and sister-in-law and their children, and so it'll be fun. That's to me, like, I get less excited, at least just for me, about going to an open house for a temple, because it's sort of like, I've seen the inside of a temple, and it's cool because every temple is different. And that's another thing, it's a box on the outside, but then on the inside, they do try to do reflect things to make it regional. Mm-hmm. And Kalama, this reporter does note like the repetitive pattern of like a local, like the state flower that's found like carved into the things. And he was really impressed with like just how personal and local they tried to make it. Anyway, to me, what I'm looking forward to is going through with these nephews of mine, because none of them are old enough to have been through a local temple open house. So this will, for them, these nephews are between 5 and 10, and it'd be really fun to see them see the inside of a temple for the first time, be able to talk with them about it. So I'm looking forward to that.
I remember when we went to the Philadelphia open house in 2016, it was fun because we had our one son was just over a year old at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was like he doesn't remember it or anything. My biggest fear was that he would be like irreverent, even though a temple open house can still be louder than you expect a temple to be when you're walking around. And in Philadelphia, especially so, because it's wood floors throughout. Like they've got carpeting as you go into some of the ordinance rooms, but the staircases that go up on all the ends of it are just uncarpeted wood. And so it is during an open house, you just hear thunder of people walking up and down throughout, mm-hmm. which is kind of interesting. So my big fear, he like ran off in the baptistry or something like that. We had to go grab him. That was fun. Another news, very personal for me, Jared. Once again, we're always reporting there's many temples in the church, but there's only one Yorba Linda, California temple, my homeland. And very excited because this week the church released the rendering for said temple. And what I'm seriously the happiest about is it actually looks kind of cool. I mean, we were talking about temples being boxes that don't, especially in North America, they kind of follow the same old stuff. And they announced 3 other temple renderings in the same release. The one in Grand Junction, Colorado, which kind of just looks like the Sacramento temple, but tweaked a bit. The Elko, Nevada temple, which is just kind of, modern with the spire. And the one in Burley, Idaho, also modern, also cool, totally cool, but kind of what you'd expect for a lot of temples in North America. The Yorba Linda one, on the other hand, for reasons that I'm pleased with, I don't know what went into it, very much follows California Spanish style, even more so than the Newport Beach temple. The Newport Beach follows mm-hmm. that mission style, but it's all salmon colored. This, you've got red Spanish tile throughout, even up on the cupola on the top.
Yeah. And also a peaked roof. Often these boxy North American temples just have like the flat roof thing. And I like that it's a peaked roof and you can see the slope of it with the tiles on it. It's a nice,
and you can tell it's basically going to follow the same floor plan as like the Grand Junction Temple or even the one in Elko. Like you can tell they're the same general idea. But I love that whoever decided let's make this one look different. It's got Baroque features. You get some of the flair to it.
Yeah.
So I'm just pleased with that. That whenever that thing gets completed, it's got. Kind of cool. I saw some detractors. I'm in some Facebook groups about this temple. Most people are happy with it, but I could understand the argument if some folks said this looks like it's a library, which if you've been to Southern California, you could easily see this being any number of faux Spanish like municipal buildings that dot the landscape, especially in like master plan cities. You could easily see a city hall or a library or something kind of being built in that same way, like a nice modern twist on Spanish architecture. But still, it's cool. I mean, it's amazing how quickly they've moved on so many of these temples that were announced in April.
I'm sure the spire is taller than what a local library would have.
One would hope. It is missing a Moroni.
Yeah, that would help it stand out a little more.
And it's on a very busy street, too, where it's in terms of standing out. It's in an area already zoned for religious buildings. So there is a Danish Lutheran church. It's huge right across the street. There's a Baptist church. I think there's a Presbyterian church right up there. And there's a big like evangelical thing up the way too. It's this whole little church boulevard. It's kind of cool.
It is pretty cool looking, and you were comparing it to like the kind of more staid, generic look to an Elko, Nevada,
which
temple.
Are still.
I know. I mean, hopefully our listeners know us well enough to know that we're not detracting from any temple. We're just comparing architectural styles here. And like with Yorba Linda, I mean, in that whole area, yeah, you have like a traditional architecture because of Spanish missions and such. And I'm trying to figure out what you would use for like traditional local architecture for Elko, Nevada. I mean, other than trying to make it look like an old timey saloon or something like that, like how do you reflect the history and architectural richness of Elko, Nevada? I mean,
and that is something they run into. And even not to knock Burley, Idaho or anywhere else, right? But that is something to bear in mind. This is probably my favorite temple since I just sent you a link, Joe. I don't know if you can see our chat,
I just clicked
Jared.
on it, yeah.
But the Puebla, Mexico Temple.
Oh, yeah, that's
which
beautiful.
Is pretty cool looking. I can dig that one. The other one that jumps out at me is the Tucson Temple, which has been dedicated for a few years. The Tucson Temple almost looks Florentine in its architecture, and it's kind of cool. I like it when they
Tucson has a really interesting. It's a cool looking town architecturally, its traditions, and like this Puebla one, it incorporates a lot of that Spanish colonial style. But like the cupola looks much more old country European than you expect to see. It's a cool look. Yeah,
I agree. So good on you, church. Good on you.
Good on you, church architects or contractors.
I would love to talk to any of you. I know these people who design temples aren't even allowed to really speak publicly about it. But seriously, if you know anyone who is, I would love to have a discussion about that.
I will say, just going back to my family, lest you think I only have bad things to say about my mom's side of the family. Her Uncle Jim, who was so Deanne's mother is Maureen. Maureen's sister is Maydeen. And her husband Jim. So this is again. So my great uncle, my mom's uncle, he was a contractor and a builder who he always bid on temples. He never built a temple. He always tried to. He always bid on them. Which
is a whole other funny thing. I bet people don't think about temples. Being like
so he never designed anything, but he was a great, very skilled builder. What he did build was the North Visitors Center on Temple Square.
Oh, sorry, buddy.
I know. I was really sad when they announced that it was being torn down. First of all, because I have a lot of good memories there. Anytime we went to Utah on a family vacation, we would go to the North Visitor Center and go look at the Christus and get pictures in front of it. So I have a lot of good childhood memories. But also because, that's part of my family legacy. My mom's uncle built that building. Anyway, that's just another aside. And again, I don't want anybody to think, oh, Jared just thinks his mom's side of the family is all nuts. They're not all nuts. Some of them are great. We're great builders, and Anyway, you just made me think about that when you were saying, "Hey, let's get a temple architect on the show here." And I was like, "Well, I did know a contractor who built for the church." Anyway, he died a few years ago, so we can't get him on the show. That would have been cool.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, I'll jump in on another one here real quick. The Tabernacle Choir has a plan to come back. They were supposed to resume rehearsals back in August, and they decided to put a pause on that as they assessed the situation. And it's funny because they announced the pause. Then within that next week was when they announced Mike Levitt was the new president of the choir, which I'm assuming was in the works before that point. So I don't know if he preemptively said, I know you haven't announced it yet, but can we put a hold on the plans so I don't come into a mess? Might have. I don't know. But and Mike Levitt, of course, was governor of Utah. He was also the Secretary of Health and Human Services under George W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And now he gets this really cool thing where he gets to lead the choir. And I've never seen so much press for a TabCats president in my life. They've had presidents our whole lives. There's always been a president of the choir, but I see so much coverage for Mike Levitt being the president, which is fine.
Because he's shaking things up. He called counselors. That's never happened before, and now he's. I think in a way, and I mean this in the least pejorative sense possible, but he's acting like a governor. He's acting like somebody who has the experience of governing, and he's like, "Here's our plan. Here's here's how it's going to be executed." Like, I don't know. I kind of like it. I like that he's bringing his leadership experience to say we need to take the reins and try and figure out the future of how this choir is going to operate. And I don't know. I think it's refreshing to have this much publicity about it and to say, "Here's how it's going to go." And I don't know. I like it.
No, it's good because General Conference is right upon us, and they haven't spoken a ton about the choir's plans for it. We know conference will be in the conference center main hall once more, even though there will be no attendees.
Right.
And I imagine the whole reason they did that is because they wanted to, at the very least, have live music from the Tabernacle Choir again. Because if you're not going to have the choir, why bother being in the room other than?
It'll be really interesting to see because we're used to seeing these really packed in sections of the choir, right underneath the organ pipes. And it'll be interesting to see if they socially distance them and have this sparsely populated choir spread throughout the choir.
And
seats.
And that's part of the plan. There's a 7-layer plan as President Levitt describes it. I like the analogy he uses. He's like, it's basically kind of like Swiss cheese. If you take a bunch of slices, yes, each slice has a hole. It has a weakness, so to speak. But if you lay different slices on top of one another, they will continue to cover the different holes, and hopefully as one functional chunk of cheese, prevents things from getting through.
I liked your likening to 7-layer burrito better.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Rest in peace, Taco Bell 7-layer burrito. You are my favorite thing on the menu.
I also couldn't help but think. Also, I don't like Taco Bell, but they announced Del Taco is coming to Virginia, and I am ready. My body is ready. Even though it's going to be in like Newport.
You're like, I don't like this garbage food. I like this other garbage food.
It's like if you need fast Mexican food, Taco is vastly superior to Taco Bell. If you want that level of it, okay, I'm not going to bat for it being the greatest.
I've had both, and I'm just like, garbage food is garbage food, and sometimes it just tastes great.
So we've got 7 layers here, one of which is the distancing. But yeah, the first one's vaccinations. This is a big deal, though. They're requiring performers to get vaccinated. If you're not unable to do so, ineligible, you'll just be granted special leave until it's safe for you to come back.
But it sounds like, and it doesn't say this specifically, but then it sounds like if you say, no, I won't get vaccinated, like it sounds like you'll be invited to leave the choir.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's the case. And then of course they'll have regular screenings, and if you are even living in an immunocompromised household, you'll be granted special leave. Every performer must also be tested prior to every performance. And then the social distancing element, which I assume the choir is roughly 300 people. I'm assuming this means they'll scatter them across the rostrum as opposed to just packing 150 people like in the middle instead. So I'm guessing that's what they'll do. They'll have to wear face coverings anytime they're not actively rehearsing or singing, which makes sense. Self-reporting, even if your kids have sniffles, you're supposed to report it to the choir. And ventilation, they're only going to have performances in the conference center because the conference center has superior HVAC compared to somewhere like the Tabernacle itself.
Well, and also, if you think about it, not just HVAC, like not it's only huge. Exactly. they can spread out because that choir section is very big, but then also there's so much open air. I remember, seeing the diagram when they first opened the conference center, and they demonstrated on the diagram that you could fit a full 737 inside that meeting hall in the conference center. So there's tons of space, and it's well ventilated. So as the 7th layer of the burrito, it seems like it's pretty good. It
makes a lot of sense. Even with them singing in there with church leadership up there, there's still such a space even between where the choir sits and anybody who's vulnerable.
The church leadership is also all wearing masks, and they're spread out. And, that might be another reason why they're doing it in the conference center, is because not everybody would have to sit on the stand. You could also have people spread out even further and have some people out, on the floor, and not have to have everybody all up there together on the stand.
Yeah, so it's cool. And the nice thing is Levitt reiterated that if this plan doesn't bear good fruit, then he's like, then we'll pause rehearsals and performances again until we figure it out. I like that he's being totally straight up about it. Like, if this doesn't work, then okay, we're back to square one.
He's very pragmatic, and I like it. Yeah. What's interesting to me is that what we're doing right now, this little bit of speculation about the choir and whether or not they're going to sing at General Conference, this is the most General Conference speculation I've heard at all. For this session, you think about the last 3 or 4 years and how much General Conference speculation we loved. They're going to announce this, and we're going to go to that, or whatever. And I haven't heard any of that this time around. And so, what we're doing right here, maybe the choir will sing. That's the hottest speculation we've got, Jeff.
That's pretty much fair. We're just happy to be having conference.
That's true.
This is our 4th COVID conference we're coming on, if we can believe that. Let's, folks, make a goal collectively as a church to have regular general conference next April. Come on.
Well, I'm going to go out and throw out, just for the sake of having a speculation, I'm going to go ahead and throw out that maybe they'll redefine hot drinks, and all of us hot chocolate loving saints will no longer be able to drink cocoa, because they're going to be like, hey, it's a hot drink. It's over. Say goodbye. Say goodbye to your hot cider.
No, I still have $40 to Starbucks that my boss got me 2 Christmases ago. It's still in my wallet. I need it.
All right. So I actually don't think they're going to do this, but it does bring us to an interesting article that appeared on By Common Consent. Sam Brunson, who I think always writes very thoughtful and interesting things. And he doesn't only blog on By Common Consent, he writes in other places too. I believe Sam Brunson, he's a tax lawyer or in a tax, he teaches tax law.
Tax law, yeah.
Yeah. So he's really well-educated, well-read person. Anyway, he did a little research and trying to figure out, and he makes it very clear. He doesn't say this till the very end of the article, but he's like, I'm not trying here to make any kind of justification for coffee and tea being allowed as part of the word of wisdom. And he says, like, they are obviously not. But what he was interested in is, if you go back to the 1830s when the word of wisdom was received, like, Joseph Smith, the Lord through Joseph Smith, just throws out the term hot drinks as if we all know what he's talking about. And he even points out, though, like, even in that early period, there was questions among the Quorum of the 12 and disagreement about what was the definition of a hot drink. And so anyway, it was just an interesting article worth checking out. He does some cool historical digging to find contemporary documents where other people who were talking about health also talk about hot drinks and some of the theories that they had at the time. That, like, it was bad for your teeth because the temperature would, like, weaken the materials and that you would have tooth issues, or it's same thing, like it could weaken your stomach and your stomach could end up turning into a different shape, never to be recovered because of the temperature of the drinks that you were consuming. Funny, because they don't say anything about soup or stew. It's just hot drinks.
Drinks.
Anyway, I don't know that there's much really to discuss about this other than the fact that Sam did he used a cool feature of Google that I was not aware of, where he was able to specify his search to give him results confined to a certain time period.
Yeah.
And he made that time period 1800 to 1850 and found everything that he could where people were talking about hot drinks as related to health and personal wellness. And it was cool. It's a cool little search.
Would you like me to teach you all about how to do Boolean searches, Jared? I do
know about Boolean searches.
Well, that's what Google is, but you can get in the weeds with that stuff. You can set specific terms, date windows, all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. I remember learning about Boolean searches in like my freshman writing class at BYU, but I'd never heard of Google Ngram search. Like I guess that's a souped up way to do use specific Boolean search terms. I've tried using some Boolean search terms in just normal Google, and it often doesn't know what you're trying to do. So my understanding is that maybe that's what Google Ngram is for. It like allows you to do those little bit more sophisticated, refined searches. Anyway, check it out. It's called On Hot Drinks by Sam Brunson, found at the By Common Consent blog.
Now let's hit up a quick things in the legal arena. If you've been following the beautiful Huntsman lawsuit from Mr. Which Huntsman are we talking about? I'm forgetting the name. James Huntsman. We talked about this for the few months. James Huntsman has been suing the church, alleging fraud, that the church used his tithing money to build places like City Creek, and that essentially that's not what they said they would do, and he wants his tithing money back, and it's always kind of seemed like a sham lawsuit just to get attention. Anyway, the judge overseeing the lawsuit threw the thing out, and he basically said his main point was that, like, you can't prove that the church was disingenuous with the way it used your money, whether or not to build City Creek. That's just not there. At the same time, though, he also rejected the church's assertion that the First Amendment should have barred Huntsman from even bringing the lawsuit. That's what the church's lawyers were arguing.
Yeah, the church, we've talked about this on the show before, angle. But like the church is really trying to like set its own terms about what religious freedom means. Yeah. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, those are good points. And other times I'm like, I think the lawyers might have something to say about that, And this is a case where a judge was like, no, that's not what the First Amendment does,
Yeah. Yeah. So that happened. And also now Boy Scouts of America, the church is going to pay, our church, $250 million into a fund for Boy Scout sexual abuse victims. Of course, the church was the largest patron of scouting while we were still in it for 100 odd years until we left. Has it even been 2 years since we bailed on scouting at this point? Maybe just about.
It was pre-pandemic, I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was right before that, I think. So that's the main gist of it right there, though. So the total fund will have more than $1 billion from Boy Scouts' primary insurer, but that's still $250 million from the church. That is not small potatoes.
I know, but what's interesting is that a lot of people are complaining, like victims of sexual abuse and people who are involved in the lawsuit are saying like, this isn't enough. Like there should be more. And because there's I think 60,000 total claimants who are saying that they got, and not from the church alone. I think this is on a whole, people who are filing complaints against, and alleging sexual abuse while they were, kids in the Boy Scouts of America. Anyway, so there's 60,000 and they're saying $1 billion seems like a lot, but there needs to be more because, anyway, I just thought it was interesting because, yeah, you and I are going, whoa, this is a lot of money. And the claimants are like, nope, no, it's not. More. It's a sticky wicket, as they would say on an old timey movie.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I don't know where to go from there, Jeff. You kind of, that's what a downer. Let's go. Let's continue with, I guess.
We got a couple. We don't have to do them all, but we've got a couple other solid ones this week.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how to segue to this, so we're just going to do the apropos of nothing.
There it is. That's what I wanted. Good man.
So Christina Rossetti, who's very interesting. I highly recommend following her on Twitter. She's a Catholic scholar whose main area of focus is FLDS church stuff, like members and plural marriage, issues like that. And very, very, very smart individual, like worth following on Twitter. So she recently published an article on religiondispatches.org called Truth is the Pearl of Great Price. And she's talking all about how there has basically become an offshoot of our church, which takes beliefs about Mormonism and foundations set up by Joseph Smith, and then brings into them QAnon conspiracies and canonizes the whole thing to like an actual belief system. And also, like, and if any of our listeners are familiar with Denver Snuffer and the Snufferite, small following that he got a few years ago, he also laid some of the foundations for this. Anyway, we don't need to describe this entire thing, but again, it's an article worth checking out, and especially from a really brilliant religious studies scholar like this. Kind of really, she does a good job. She's a good writer of putting it all together and showing how foundational LDS apocalyptic beliefs combined with current oddball conspiracy theories, and then mix it in with all the other like weird little traditions we get from schismatic offshoots of the church, which break off, all the time. And we get this really interesting QAnon Mormon soup. The biggest thing, and I'll just read this because just to really pique your curiosity in case you're still not convinced that you should read this. Here is a quote from the article. I believe, this is not Christina Rossetti talking, she's quoting someone else. I believe that Brigham Young was a Rothschild agent sent to assassinate the Smith family and gain control over the church. The cabal have taken over every major religious institutions. The Book of Mormon warns against this, but modern day prophets don't even talk about it and also cover up a lot of what Joseph Smith taught. So it's interesting because you can see right in that statement, first of all, it's cuckoo bananas. I think that's the technical term. But also there's like a healthy dose of anti-Semitism peppered in here with the whole Rothschild thing. Mm-hmm. And then, the conspiracy mindset that like there's a worldwide cabal that has taken over control of every major religion. So, but you then see this related directly to modern QAnon beliefs about the nefarious sex ring, child prostitution ring that has taken over the government, and that, we're waiting for Q to arise and bring about the, what do they call it? Like, eviction of the deep state and restoring true governance to America, blah, blah,
Rapture.
blah. Yeah.
Rapture.
So anyway, crazy, weird stuff, hard to separate because people are marrying it to our religious beliefs. So,
but give it a read, people. Give it a read.
It's super interesting.
Other random news: President Nelson launches a Spanish Instagram account. Okay, I couldn't talk there at the end, but President Nelson now has a Spanish Instagram account. It's the first time a senior church leader has had a Spanish-only social media account, implying that there have been senior church leaders that have dabbled in Spanish at some point or another. And I bet that Suarez can't help himself. He's probably all over the place falang Portuguese, and who knows? So that's really all there is to it. I mean, it makes sense. Obviously, we have huge membership in Spanish. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually saw one of these created in Portuguese at some point to reach the Brazilian saints, and of course the Portuguese saints and the Mozambican saints, amongst others. But good times. That's all. It's great. I mean,
President Nelson speaks Spanish. Great about it. yeah, I was going to say, like,
So
the
that's
article
cool.
points out that, President Nelson, who knows how conversant he is in Spanish, but he has made an effort to learn the language and tried to be able to speak it well. And so, like, that's a way for him to try and connect with a significant portion, a demographic portion of the membership of the church, is to try and speak and understand their language, and now to open an Instagram account where he can speak out to them more directly through social media. Pretty cool.
And I like this a lot. I mean, I have concerns, honestly, sometimes as a member of our church, even as we try to become more pluralistic and we have more and more people in higher leadership positions from around the world as the church grows and expands its global footprint, which is all great. But so much is still dependent on English and on people, embracing these North American leaders who are doing things in English. So I think it's awesome. I love the idea of just saying, well, we're going to try to bring the church to you and not make you feel like it's an English first church and then everything's translated towards you. Like, we can actually just be with you in your native sense. This goes back to how I wish they would make temple films back when they were still not slideshow-ish. That's one of the benefits of the whole slideshow thing, I guess, right? But I always wish they would have actually filmed some in Spanish, just straight up, full blown.
In Portuguese, for sure.
Spanish and Portuguese, actual actors speaking that language, no dubbing. I think that was justified because I'm in a position to feel these things, right? But
of course, and I'm 100% agree with you, and I believe I have stated this at some point before on this show, but it made me very sad. I was actually very excited when we had that one session, that one conference. It was either,
when we did the native languages,
where they let the speakers speak in their native languages, and for English speakers or whoever else, we got the dub, we got the voiceover interpreter or translator, and I think that was so great because we had, I believe one of the general authorities gave a talk in like Mandarin Chinese or Cantonese, I can't remember which one. There was at least one in Spanish because I remember listening after conference was over, finding the Spanish original and listening to that because I was like, hey, I can understand this. And anyway, I was so sad when they announced that they weren't going to do that again, because I think that is a good way to address what you're talking about. That this is a worldwide church, and it's not like better learn English in order to function in the church, and it's all English centric. I don't know.
That's not just English. If you're a general authority, you have to become a U.S. citizen too. Eventually, that's another.
Really, I don't think I knew that.
I think it's required. I mean, like Uchtdorf is a U.S. citizen, as we know, and I think it's like a requirement. I don't know if he just did it.
Suarez then as well.
It probably is. I don't know, but I want to be clear though. I don't know if it's a requirement or if it's a practicality where, like, Dieter Uchtdorf said, my life's going to be a lot easier if I'm a U.S. citizen, given what I have to do now for the rest of my life.
Living in Salt Lake City.
Living here, traveling the world. I mean, not that a German passport probably gets you in more doors than a U.S. one at this point, but still.
Depends on where you go. Depends on where you go.
Yeah.
Real quick, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this, but the church, at least in the North America West area, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm not going to click on the article right now to make sure I'm saying it right. But in California, Oregon, and Washington, the area presidency has made it very clear to stake presidents and bishops they are not to sign religious exemptions for people who want to get out of getting vaccines on a religious basis. And it's interesting because the article points out that there's at least two main reasons why they're not allowed to. And first is, it's not one of our beliefs. Like, nowhere in the canon or in our published materials are you going to find a teaching that we are opposed to vaccinations.
If anything, you find the opposite.
Exactly. And that was point number two. Quite the opposite. Our prophet has repeatedly encouraged people to get the vaccine for COVID. And also we have statements in our handbooks that encourage people getting vaccines for their children, preventing preventable diseases, et cetera. And then the other big thing, and the article only really briefly touched on this, is that really if a bishop or a stake president were to sign such a thing, they would be in danger of committing perjury, that this is not truthful. And if somebody were to legally challenge whether or not this was truly a religious exemption, that a bishop or stake president who signed such a thing, and by implication then the church as a whole, could be under legal fire for bearing false witness and perjuring itself. So those of you who are vaccine resistant or hesitant and hoping that your bishop or stake president, and again, the article only talks about this applying to that area, this coming statement from the area presidency that covers California, Oregon, and Washington. But my assumption is that this same principle would apply to the church as a whole. And if we haven't received such a statement from the First Presidency yet. At some point, they will release it as it becomes more and more of an issue. Anyway, in case you were curious, no, the church will not grant you a religious exemption from the COVID-19 vaccine, any of them.
And as a side note, this is one of these things that I like that you get from the Trib compared to Deseret News. Deseret News does have a good article essentially about what you need to know about religious exemptions for vaccine mandates that came out last week, that talks about the history of that, what's involved, the criteria, stressing the church's position on vaccines. I mean, it's not, but they don't go out of their way to cover what the Trib did and be like, yeah, the church isn't going to help you in California. If you think that's your jam,
and again, like my assumption is that it's not, I would assume that it's not just California. Like the church isn't going to do this for you anywhere.
That area. And I think it's, it portends action elsewhere in case it comes to that. And Trib web people, we got to speak about your URLs. Okay, you can't make your URL LDS-church-won't-help and leave it at that. Where's the rest of your URL? This is like part of how web indexing works, people.
No, I'm sorry, Jeff. It's just that's how it is. The LDS Church.
I make these podcasts rank highly by, like, if you look at the URL for the show will be called whatever it's called, but then the rest of the URL say stuff like the Mormon conspiracy, all kinds of stuff like that, just to get ranking. I mean, it works. It works brilliantly.
I think we should go out on this.
Oh, you're going for it. All right.
Yeah. All right. So, and this is an issue that is obviously dear to Jeff and me. But there is a Emeritus BYU professor who wants beards restored to the general population of BYU students.
Didn't we just do a change.org thing about this at some point? Is this the same one?
Probably. I mean, I don't imagine that this is going to do any good. The church, like, very famously doesn't respond like
to
positively.
Change.org?
Well, not just to change.org, just to social movements in general.
Oh, yeah, of course not.
Like, I
wish the church did what the Obama White House did with wethepeople.gov. I wish you could respond to things at the church's website and get signatures, and then at a certain threshold, they would be required to issue a response.
Well, I remember. So you and I interviewed, this is over a year ago now, Nylan McBain for her book about pioneering the vote. August. I remember a few years before that interview, I actually went to a small, like, I don't know if you call it a fireside or whatever, but our stake put on hosted her, and she talked about her book, Women in Church, or Women at Church, where she talked about different ways that we could expand and emphasize the role of women at church and give them responsibilities that maybe they, that scripturally there's no reason why they couldn't do it, or, et cetera, et cetera. It's really interesting, to hear her talk about the book. But I remember her saying that, that she was pretty sure, and I don't want to like put words into Nylan McBain's mouth or paraphrase her incorrectly, but the gist of it was that social pressure from groups like Ordained Women kind of does more harm than good, because if the church had been considering like letting young women pass the sacrament, which doctrinally there's no reason why they can't, there's nothing in the Doctrine and Covenants that says, a young woman or anyone at all can't pass the sacrament. So if the church had been considering that, an ordained woman comes out and is like, let women pass the sacrament, like, it's more likely that they're going to say, you know what, we're not going to do that, because, and again, not to paraphrase and put words into the church's mouth, but it's sort of that response of, I'm going to do it because I want to, not because you told me to,
Yep.
Anyway,
exactly.
It's just interesting, like when you see like these change.org petitions or like social media pushes that people are like, let BYU students grow beards. Like, if they had been considering it, it's almost like they're like, well, now we can't do it, because then every Tom, Dick, and Harry who wants something is just going to raise a ruckus on social media and think they can get their way. But it's an interesting little article, and he makes good points about the origin.
For all of that, but I'd say for all of those, you do have cases of, like, people petitioning a lot to change the policy on having adults in the room with bishops during interviews of youth. And that's actually something the church did adopt. It didn't come without some collateral damage to get there. Right. But
you're right. And we see that in the classic example is Emma complaining to Joseph about stains on the floor, right? In the upper room of the Newell K. Whitney store, and that leading to the word of wisdom. Like, people bringing their concerns to the church does result in change a lot of the cases, but the way in which you do it, I think, is important, and also the timing. And so again, I change.org petition with nearly 1,000 signatures, as the Trib article says. I don't know if that's going to like do much.
And I think this is the one we had from a while ago too, and they just decided to profile this guy finally.
Maybe. I mean, the article is September 19th.
reading some of the copy on the actual change.org petition itself. Let me go back to it right here. I think that reads like the one I've read before. Bring back the beard. Because it talked about how beards were showed righteousness and all that. I think this, because this petition dates back 2 months. And the Trib decided now to, they must really want to push this over the line somehow, because this has been around for a while. Now they're like, let's profile the BYU professor who's behind it to see if we can get
Emeritus BYU Professor, because he only speaks up because it's like he's not rocking the boat.
Is that a status? Why isn't it retired BYU professor? Is emeritus? I thought that's a thing we only apply to general authorities. So you can be emeritus. Are you an emeritus professor at
I think that's a general
university?
term used in universities.
Is it used? Okay, I didn't know this. I don't know.
Because I think if you're tenured, you never really, like if you have tenure at a university, I don't think you ever really leave, right? Like, that you might retire, but you're still considered a professor with a tenured professor at the university until you're dead. So I think
it's fair. There's a Wikipedia article. In its current usage, it's an adjective to designate a retired chair, professor, pastor, bishop, pope, director, president, prime minister, rabbi, emperor, or other person who has been permitted to retain an honorary title even when no longer carrying out.
Wow, I've never heard of an emeritus emperor, but it makes sense.
Me neither. I want the emeritus president. Why do we keep saying that? Former presidents? It should be emeritus president.
Or impeached president, depending on how they left.
Jared, don't take us there, man. We did so well. We did so well.
I'm just kidding. I wanted to say though, I do think the article does raise some good points. We're kind of like poo-pooing this whole effort, say it's not going to work. But he makes a point that the whole beard ban came about in the 60s as sort of a cultural response to revolutionaries and war protesters. Also, I think I've heard other people say also Islamic extremists, that beards were associated with them back in the 60s. Who knows? Whatever the point, whatever the reason was then, it's not. I mean, the article now points out a beard is no longer a symbol of rebellion or just trying to boot the status quo or whatever. And it's a good point. Like, there's not a social message associated with the beard like there was in the 60s, or like that you could argue there was in the 60s. The other thing that was interesting, I saw Blair Hodges he used to run the BYU Maxwell Institute podcast. And so he was an employee of BYU, and he wears a beard. And he commented on this article, and he pointed out that the way that this is enforced, like if you do need to have a beard for like a medical exception, you have to reapply every year. And the way that you reapply and prove that you still need a beard exception is they make you shave. And he's like, this is kind of like a bad policy, because I don't shave because I have this sensitive skin issue that it makes it very painful and very difficult. And, it hurts my skin so badly. And yet, in order to continue to get that exemption for that purpose, I had to do that to myself. It's like saying oh, really? You're diabetic and you need a diabetic exception? Well, eat this sugar and prove it to us, So I don't know.
Okay, so you're in a coma now. All right.
Now we believe you. It kind of feels, so the point is, the way it's enforced is kind of weird, and the reasons for it are a little sketchy and not on a solid foundation anymore. So the article and Blair Hodges and other people have raised many, many good points. There's not really a good reason to keep doing this other than the fact that, well, it's just the way we've always done it. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm for bringing back the beard at BYU. Jeff and I are both advocates for the beard. We like them.
100%.
I'm pro beard.
Absolutely true.
And I'm also pro coach beard.
Well, everyone, regardless of your gender affiliation, I hope you all grow beards. And I hope everyone beards it up big time. That's going to be it for the show this week. I think we've covered some terrific territory. I enjoyed the LuLaRoe discussion in particular, Jared. So thank you for the insight.
Sorry, I went a little off the rails there, but I just thought you would be entertained, and our listeners would be entertained.
You're so excited. You're excited. How can you not be? It's. I don't have cool stories like that in my family, unless you want to talk about polygamists in the Mormon colonies. Actually, I'll give you this little tidbit. My grandmother came from the fourth wife in the colonies in Colonia Dublin, and they got married less than a year before the second manifesto dropped. So I'm from one of the very, very last, still basically legit polygamist lines.
Wow.
That's what I've learned. We are right at the wire but they didn't do it after the fact. So that's my claim to fame right there. So that's kind of why, like, I guess she was so young comparatively. I mean, you have someone who was born in the mid 1920s.
This is I'm guessing this is an Openshaw.
No, this is an Evans side. This is my
Evans.
mom's side of the family.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes more sense because Evans is a much more common name that you know, and often with these polygamous families, you have these names throughout the church, like you know.
No, the Openshaw comes from Manchester, England, and I believe though there were Openshaws who joined the church and then
I thought you said it was Welsh.
No. Evans is Welsh. Evans is a Welsh name, but
Openshaw is northern England. Got it.
Openshaw is a Mancunian. Yes, sir. There's a district in Manchester called Openshaw, which I've never visited. Oh, but perhaps it's a weird last name. I talked about this on the show the other week. Openshaw. I should be. I mean, what Gillen's is better? What's Gillen's? Irish? I don't know.
No, it's also northern England. Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
It's like
I wish I were from like Northumbria instead. I mean, Manchester's fine, but I've got a soft spot for those Geordies.
The Gillenses or Gillenses, if you will, come out of Lincolnshire. So it's also an unexciting part of northern England. So
no, it's wonderful. If you watch the little mini series, The English Game, all about the creation of football.
Oh yeah,
most of it takes place in Lancashire, right there. Yeah, so.
Oh well, I'll have to check it out because that is one of the lands of my forebears. Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone, Ancestry. Wow, good times all around. I'd like to thank Jared for being here this week. It's a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Pleasure to be here.
And we thank you all for taking the time to listen. Can't do it without you. We hope you'll tune in again next week as we get in the run-up for conference. Lots of content will be coming out, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. And until then, we'll talk to you later. Have a terrific time. I'm Jeff. That was Jared. This Week in Mormons is over. Ta-ta.